Released in 1972 by Atari, Pong is one of the first video games ever made. It's a simple 1v1 table tennis game with very primitive 2D graphics. Being such a simple game limited by the technology of its time, it didn't require or have many sound effects. However, the sounds it did include would quickly become ingrained in the minds of those who played it. The repetitive clicky nature of the game's audio made it immediately recognizable, especially at a time when video games themselves were still new. The game kept things very simple with only 3 sound effects: the ball hitting the paddle, the ball hitting the wall, and a player scoring. The tone and length of these sounds are subtle details, but they can make the sounds more impactful and important when used correctly. For example, the sound effect used for the ball hitting a paddle is a very quick high-pitched blip. The sound for hitting a wall is quite similar, just being slightly lower pitched. In contrast to these sounds, the sound for a player scoring is a much more alerting and drawn-out buzz. This low pitch and alarm-like sound can create a sense of tension for the losing player. In 2008, IGN held an interview with one of the key minds behind Pong, Alan Alcorn. This question regarding the game's sound design was asked. The sound design for Pong was just working and playing with what you had, right? I mean, you were at the edge of technology, right? There was no microprocessor, there was no computer in there. I just tried to make the game better and better. And at the end of the thing, he, Nolan Bushnell, said, "You've got to have sound." "Oh, okay, well, I'm over budget and 3 months into this thing." And Nolan said, "I want the roar of a crowd of thousands. Cheers, applause. How do you do that with digital circuits? Ones and zeros? I had no idea." So I went in there that afternoon and in less than an hour, poked around and found a few different tones that already existed in the sync generator and gated them out, and it took half a chip to do that. And I said, "There's the sound. If you don't like it, you do it." Despite the limitations that Atari were faced with, they still managed to create distinct and dramatic audio for key events in gameplay. Another factor to include is how often the players will hear these sounds. The sounds of the ball hitting surfaces are ones the player will hear frequently in gameplay, whereas the more dramatic scoring sound won't be heard as often. If the audio for scoring was heard as much as the others, it would lose its sense of drama and tension. Released in 2009, Minecraft is arguably one of the greatest video games of all time, despite there being no set objectives or rules. This trait is also shown in the game's sound design and soundtrack, as the game prides itself on its pure sandbox gameplay. It only includes audio from the player's actions and creatures. The music present in the game is very simple, often comprising of a few piano notes looping over soft strings, and it only plays once every 10 to 20 minutes of gameplay. I think this is a great way of giving the player that freedom to imagine. The world of Minecraft is a blank canvas for the player to use, and the audio design plays a huge part in that. Minecraft soundtrack has had a few composers over the years, but the man who created the first 2 soundtrack albums for the game goes by the name of Daniel Rosenfeld, better known as C418. His initial musical works set the standard for how future composers would create music for the game, and they've become iconically nostalgic in the minds of gamers everywhere. Soothing piano tones and soft strings are often present in Rosenfeld's soundtracks. Many have even compared the music to the works of Aphex Twin and Brian Eno. The music evokes a sense of innocence and playfulness, which greatly complements Minecraft's carefree sandbox experience. In a direct quote from Rosenfeld's website, he states, "Minimalism was and is definitely key when it comes to the soundtrack. Although Minecraft in and of itself is a very frantic and wild experience, I wanted to give the game a contrast by essentially giving the player a pentatonic chill pill. Some fans actually like to listen to this album while they go to sleep, which is just as well another interesting use for it. I think the calming sounds let players think. It doesn't overwhelm them or overshadow the gameplay. It merely enhances the experience by being emotionally open-ended, letting the player decide how the story goes."
I think it goes without saying, sound design is underappreciated as an element of game design. A game's sounds can fully make or break the experience. For example, Silent Hill 2's droning ambient soundtrack is famous for how it adds to the game's chilling atmosphere. Well, what if we got rid of it? Suddenly things feel much more focused, like the player is listening through the character's ears. the scale and scope of the game feels shrunk down to the player's 5 meters of personal space. What if we added music from another game?
Is it dead? What the hell is it?
Well, that certainly changes things.
Another good example of how a game's audio can shape a player's experience is Piglet's Big Game. This game came out in 2003, yet it's seeing a huge peak in popularity right now. One look at the trend tells you that this is because of its jarring sound and music design, also contributed to by its environments. Some of the tracks and environments in this game feel much more suited to a Resident Evil or Silent Hill type of game, not one set in the Winnie the Pooh universe. It completely changes the experience from a light-hearted journey in a lovable cartoon world to an off-putting walk through an uncanny dreamscape. Really quick, while we're on the topic of how sounds can completely change the way something feels, something I found really interesting and honestly quite hilarious in particular is this thing where people take clips from the show Friends, but they remove all of the laugh tracks, and most of the time this is done just to make Ross look like a complete psychopath.
Hi.
Hi.
One vegetarian pizza. It's $12.15.
Oh. By the way, if it makes you feel any better, I happen to like 8-year-old boys.
600 women still live. What?
Welcome.
I got beer.
I got bottled breast milk.
Why don't we start with the beer?
Okay.
It's hilarious, but it does also say a lot about how important those laugh tracks are in establishing the tone of the scene. Sound design's power to completely change a moment is hugely represented in the film industry as well. There are countless examples of iconic sound design in movies.
Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
Okay, apparently the microphone wants to sound different again, and we're just going to roll with it. So, we've talked about how important sounds are to establishing the tone and mood of a game or movie, and now I think we need to go over how sounds are made. More often than not, sound effects used in TV, movies, and games are all acquired from sound packs. This means multiple things can pull from the same sound pack, and if you have a keen ear, you'll notice this a lot. An example that I can think of is with Half-Life 2. So many of the sound effects in that game come from this one sound pack, and so many other things have used the same sound pack, so I'll be watching something and I'll hear it and it'll completely take me out. For instances in which people may want more specific sound effects or more unique sounds, they'll resort to Foley. Named after its creator, Jack Foley, Foley is the reproduction of everyday sound effects that are added to films, videos, and other media in post-production to enhance audio quality. Jack Foley himself was a stuntman for silent films who would add his sound effects when the studio was recording the musical score. To create Foley sound effects, a team of Foley artists will perform alongside and in sync with the video. These sound effects can be made using anything. If it sounds right, then it's the right thing to use. This means that Foley artists are always thinking outside the box with what they can use to create their sound effects. Foley studios are always packed with as many objects as possible to give those Foley artists the creative freedom to choose what they want to use. While it does look like these guys are just goofing off, they are actually performing a set routine in a way. Everything has to sync perfectly with the movie and sound just right.